morning. I'm Peggy Morrison-Uten. We are here today. I really am looking forward to this conversation because my two panelists, Angela Garcia and Mary Fan Gruber, are just so smart, and they're interesting, and they have really important things to share with you all. But we're here to talk about fundraising during a pandemic. And I always so enjoy looking at the list of participants, because those of you who are in the house with us represent every kind of nonprofit I believe we have in our community, from health and human services to educational organizations, to arts organizations. Just to give you a little flavor of this, we have representation, or at least people who registered, from Scenic Pittsburgh, Crisis Center North, New Century Careers, hi Neil, saw you on there, the Hospice and Palliative Nurse Association, the Trolley Museum, and the list goes on. But one of my very favorites, who's a new organization to me, is Team Fish Guy Transplant Foundation. Welcome, Team Fish Guy. So we are privileged to have the opportunity to work at the Bear Center for Nonprofit Management across discipline, across size, across type of organization, age of organization, across every type of organizational diversity there is. And therefore, we will make our comments as relevant and useful to the group as we possibly can. We will be speaking in many cases today about best practices and principles that we have found useful, but we'll tell you some stories too, so that you can apply them to your own situation. At least that's what we hope. And as all of you know, I feel like the person on the airplane that says, if you're not going to Phoenix, now's the time to get off. Well, if you didn't come to talk about the challenges and opportunities of fundraising during a pandemic, that's what we're going to talk about today. So please be aware. And please let me also thank my colleague and friend, Yvonne Van Heidsma, who's our producer this morning and will be helping you with the technology side of the house, although Yvonne could certainly teach this course if she chose to. So we do ask, some of you have already begun to use the chat room. We will stop periodically and ask for questions, comments, or constructive dissent, because we believe in dialogue and we believe that none of us is as smart as all of us. So if you have a question, or if you think, gee, it didn't work that way for me, we will give you an opportunity to ask questions or make comments a couple of times during the session. But please don't hesitate to use the chat room. Yvonne will monitor that closely and make sure that if I haven't noticed that there's something that we need to be attentive to, she'll make sure we do attend to it. So we are very interested in making this useful and relevant to your experience, and we can do that a lot better if you participate. So strap in, guys, let's roll. So, okay, one of the things I did to get ready for this morning's conversation was look at a study that was recently released by Indiana University is the only university that I am aware of that has a school of philanthropy. And within their school of philanthropy, they have the Women's Philanthropy Institute. I visited there actually and talked to those people. They're very smart researchers, and they recently did a study on the effects of COVID-19 on fundraising. And here's what they were measuring. Let's see if any of this sounds relevant to you. They were speaking to donors about what affected their thinking about their giving practices. They were measuring uncertainty about further economic impacts. So what's going to happen in the economy? What's going to happen? Is there to be further spread of COVID-19? What's going to happen with that? Social distancing and other measures are reducing your income from your employers, or you lost your job. Social distancing and community shutdowns is reducing your interaction with your community. So how much does it matter that we are in direct contact with each other when we choose to give money? Are we motivated by the immediacy of what we know and see, the relationships and friendships that we have that drive some giving? Some people are influenced by indirect economic impacts, sort of lower stock values, although the stock market has been relatively resolute through this. And then just the fear of COVID-19, infecting people you love or infecting public figures. I don't know about you guys, but I'm still grieving about the loss of John Prine, the singer-songwriter who was one of my heroes in life. So the sorrow that we have felt at this pandemic, and the different people, both your personal friends and public figures, have affected it. So it's a lot to be thinking about. And all of you, I imagine, are on this call hoping against hope that we're going to say something that gives you fresh energy and new insight into how to pursue this this topic. So I said to you, I'm quite excited to be joined by my colleagues, Mary Fan Gruber. Many of you know both Mary and Angela because they are kind of pillars of our nonprofit sector in Pittsburgh. Mary worked at the Birmingham Foundation for 10 years. She is now the director of the Jefferson Regional Foundation, so two healthcare foundations that Mary has led. She has, before that, had experience as a nonprofit person, and I always value that in a funder because she sat in your chairs and knows how it is to need the money, huh, Mary? She's a teacher and said that she especially wanted me to remind you that she is a social worker. Many of you are also social workers, and social workers rule. So we welcome Mary today and look forward to her comments. I'm also just delighted to welcome Angela Garcia. I'm such an Angela fan. She's just a pistol. And Angela has worked at Global Links. She will celebrate her 20th anniversary with Global Links next month, I believe she said. So she is a seasoned nonprofit professional who has grown a very successful organization and has had quite an interesting time of it in the COVID-19 era. Angela has got lots of stories to tell about that. She wanted me to be sure to tell you she's a boomeranger. She's a native Pittsburgher, and she boomeranged all over the world, living in 9 different countries before she came back to Pittsburgh. But aren't we glad that Angela and her family came back to Pittsburgh and live here with us now? So the way we've organized our conversation this morning is I've asked each of the panelists to be ready to answer a question that we have talked about, and I'm going to listen to them, and then if I can provide any additional information from some of the research I did for this, I will add it in. But that's the way we're going to go. So the first question that I'd like to pose, and Mary, let's start with you, is what have you learned during this tumultuous and crazy time that we are all living in?
And we still are, aren't we? It's going on still. I think one of the things I've certainly learned is that it's amazing what we've all been able to shift and do in this virtual world. So I'm looking around, we're in bedrooms, we're in kitchens, basements, but we're doing the work. And that's what we've seen, is that we've all been able to adjust in many ways. I have seen a lot of really creative virtual events as well. So we know that, and I know we reminded our board about this a lot. We know that the spring in particular is a huge fundraising event time. And for, all of you to lose that was, a really, really big loss. But we've seen people do a lot of creative things. We've seen donors step up. So that's one lesson. Another, I think, is that we all have to continue to be ready to shift, because the world is continuing to shift, and I don't think it'll be the same. And, there are words now that are so key, like essential, which take on a very different meaning in this world. Who knew that toilet paper would be essential? And that bus drivers and grocery store clerks would be essential. But we've really learned, and we already knew, that the nonprofit sector was essential. But it's also a way for you to think about, I think, your organization, who really, really cares about your organization, who is connected to it, who benefits from it. If your organization wasn't there, who would be missing it? and thinking about being essential is really important right now. And the third thing I think about is, despite being ready to shift again and on ongoing basis, there's some things that are just the same. So, you know, communication is still really important. Partnerships are really important. People are really important. Looking for the helpers, as Mr. Rogers said. So some of those core things still count for a lot, even in a world that's virtual and that's shifting and changing. And I think if you don't think of yourself as a learning organization right now, that's probably a misnomer, because I think we're all just learning organizations and learning every moment.
Yes, I think that's really true, Mary. I have laughed and said on several calls, I feel like I should have humility and flexibility tattooed on my arm to remind me of the posture in which we need to live and move right now. You're
That's
humble
right.
and flexible, because boy, this has really taught all of us, you better roll with the punches, huh?
Yeah, yeah. And things
So
are upside down. You think about, you know, now many of our interns and our youngest staff are so crucial, because they're the ones we're going, what is that Zoom setting that you said we had to do? Or how do we make this happen in a virtual world? Or how do we make Zooming fun?
yeah,
So
absolutely.
they're the ones that we're really
Yeah.
relying on.
Yeah, in our little world, 45 classes this fall for the Bear Center, all virtual. And we just
Wow.
got a new intern, and Yvonne trained our intern this week because we have 3 boards work retreats tomorrow. And we have to
Wow.
have a technical support person on every one. So thank
Yes.
goodness for Shannon, our new intern. So you are absolutely right. You get a different perspective. So Angela, what have you learned?
Um, well, I think one of the key things that we learned, or I'll say actually affirmed, right? Learned on steroids, is the importance of communication. And as trite as that may sound, the first few weeks, it was really about being intentional about who we communicated with and having a plan to how we were going to continue to communicate with all of our stakeholders. And so that brings in 2 things specifically, really recognizing who our organization touches, you know, through each of our programs, not just our clients served, but our partners, our board, our advisors, our volunteers, and recognizing that if we didn't continue communication as things were so uncertain, people would feel left out, behind, isolated, lost. That even on the staff, that they maybe wouldn't have, you know, useful things to do. You know, I'm the executive director, I need to be raising the funds and things, but the importance of sitting down, taking a moment and planning, okay, who are all our stakeholders and who's going to be in charge of keeping them up to date on what we're doing and the decisions we're going to make. We didn't know what they were yet, but that, I think, really helped us over the past 6 months to engage all of our staff, engage our board, engage our advisors, engage our funders, and have a lot of really intentional dialogue. So I would say that the importance of communication and intentionality. And then the third thing is really that involvement of all, right? I've been an executive director now for 2.5 years. Thankfully, I have some wonderful mentors that prepped me for my transition 2.5 years ago, which was already a lot of change. But, you know, there's this whole feeling of you've got to do it all. You know, we don't have an HR person and a marketing person and a legal advisor and a finance, but learning the delegation really helped empower the staff. This was really the culmination of something we'd been working on. And it was thrilling to me to see that sort of book lesson about how, you know, really it's not a one person thing. We are 20 people staff and we are 20 people strong, and everybody, you know, pushed back, and we had a lot of tough conversations as we made decisions. But one thing we did, and this is the 4th lesson, I guess, is every time we had a decision to make, how we were going to move forward, who were we going to serve, who were we going to partner with. We brought out our mission statement, and using that as sort of our guide. You know, how often do we get out our mission statements and read them daily? Well, during a pandemic, when we're making decisions quickly, things are changing every day. We just take it back to our mission statement as the anchor. And, you know, is this meeting our mission? And well, in a public health crisis, as a public health organization, it absolutely did. So just a few of the things.
Those are so, it's so interesting to hear you speak from your direct experience and then read the literature, the research that is coming out that absolutely 100% supports everything that both Mary Ann and Angela just said. The importance of segmenting and focusing and communicating honestly and transparently cannot be overstated. But there was something that I read that was interesting to me. There was again, the question asked by the Women's Research Group at the Indiana University School of Philanthropy. They asked, have you given in the pandemic? And they found that 56% of people had given in response to the crisis. But some of that was cash dollars, which of course we love in our organizations, but some of it was giving indirectly. So they the donor interpreted when they bought a takeout meal and supported a local restaurant, that was in some ways philanthropic. It was values-driven spending, as our philanthropic choices are. Or when they bought a gift certificate from their hair guy so that he could stay afloat when he couldn't be open. Those kinds of things were interpreted in this study as also being ways in which people were supporting their community and making their community stronger, which was really interesting to me because several years ago, a guy named Tony Macklin, who used to be here in Pittsburgh, we miss him every day, did a class for the Bear Center, and he showed us how we always used to talk about fundraising as a pyramid. Some of you are old enough to remember this construct that we talked about, getting people to come in at the bottom with a small gift and moving them up through over time to being a regular donor to ultimately being a major donor or giving to a capital campaign or something like that, a pyramid that moved people around. Tony brought this thing in, this is now 3 or 4 years ago, that said it's not that anymore at all. It's a vortex. And the vortex is highly driven by social media and the way in which people who may have less money but more influence and friends are driving dollars to philanthropy. So the type of competition, and I don't say that word in an ugly, aggressive sense, I'm just saying it in a real sense, that your organization is now competing quite directly, not only with political campaigns who are raising unbelievable amounts of money right now, and that's some of their values-driven giving, but also when I buy a gift certificate for, I have to say I never thought of it that way, but when I bought a gift certificate from the guy who's cut my hair for 16 years, I didn't think of that as philanthropy, I thought of that as friendship. But nonetheless, one of the things that I had reinforced for me is that the competitive marketplace for donor choice, for how people spend their discretionary dollars, is quite complex, and COVID-19 has given them even more choices in the way in which they invest their discretionary dollars. So that was interesting to me. The other thing that was good to read in that study was the majority had maintained their giving. And so we are seeing that people, and this was true in 2008 and in other times, when there's real human need, people respond. And they understand that if they are fortunate enough to have groceries in their house, others are not, and they need to be responsive to that. So, so we continue. It makes me proud to read about the generosity of my fellow people around me and realize that is remaining true. So those are just some of the kinds of things that we've learned. What surprised you? And maybe this time I'll start with Angela. What has surprised you in this period of time?
Every day that we're still in it. Seriously, uh, two things, I guess. One, Global Links has been in Pittsburgh for 30 years, and I had the privilege of working for our founder for 18 of those. And we are a nonprofit based here, but that is better known internationally. We are better known throughout the Americas, I would say, or were better known throughout the Americas than we were in our hometown. And I think there's an analogy there, right, to a prophet or something not being known in their hometown. And to be called upon by funders, corporations, the nonprofit community as the pandemic went on for what we knew were our strengths, which were inventory management, public health, logistics, and to partner in new ways. Even though we knew those were our strengths, for people to recognize those strengths in our hometown and to build more robust partnerships with more local entities, it surprised us in a very positive way. Every time it happened. And like, guess who just called? And we knew we wanted to work with them, for the past years, but it's a new opportunity, right? And it was a new opportunity for our team to really, lend their expertise, lend their experience, not just that they know what to do, but we've worked in disasters and epidemics for 30 years, very resource poor communities. But I say the nonprofit community, we're always working in times of a disaster. All the communities we serve are living in times of scarcity, pre-pandemic. So I think it really allowed us to work with organizations in a new way, right? And we're excited about some of the partnerships we're building that will continue into the future. So that was, I think, the serious surprise. I think the more lighthearted surprise, and I had heard this again, the power of food. When we were planning our 6-month response, having worked through a disaster before, it's very adrenaline filled at the beginning, and then it gets very, very taxing. And it's like running a marathon. Like if you sprint too much at the beginning, you won't make it to the end. And so I made sure that we included a budget for feeding our team, the disaster responders, once a month. And that is the only time we all got together, physically distanced, in our property. We brought in a food truck one time. We brought in, local vendors. So it was amazing to me how much that kept up staff morale. Also that it really helped us keep our connection, because most of us are working, virtually. And the ability to use our small amount of dollars to buy food, order catering from Black-owned, Brown-owned, immigrant-owned businesses, throughout these past 6 months, and to come together and share a meal, it's really worth. Our team's still going strong, and I couldn't be prouder. And the amount of that budget was small, and as it should be, but the power of it kept my team going, and that's what I needed. So the power of food.
Yeah, never underestimate. Mary, I think you wanted to talk with Angela about your experience. We were talking about transparency. So I would like for you to, before you talk about what surprised you, maybe we could circle back to that piece as well.
Yeah, I think that's such a great story, Peggy. And we, one of the things as a foundation that we rely on is getting some great information from people on the ground. So, we're 2 or 3 steps away from sometimes what's happening. So we really rely on that. So we were really trying to listen a lot, as other funders were early in the pandemic, and on an ongoing basis, to understand what impacts they were seeing, how they were shifting, what they were trying to do, were they open or not. And we also had, wisely, some very wise folks also reaching out to us proactively as well to say, here's what's happening here. I remember Jim Guffey from SHIM calling. I remember other folks, libraries calling. Angela was one of the people who reached out to us. We did have a relationship with her. But I remember getting an email that I think was pretty long, Angela, but kind of saying, hey, I have this idea, we have been to Angela's facility and had actually, I know that we had Angela talk to other folks about logistics and about interesting things that they were doing that a lot of nonprofits don't have as a skill set. But Angela reached out with an idea that was frankly half-baked, and still kind of, in her head, like, we're thinking about doing this, and, here's what we have capacity to do, and here's how we're thinking about it. And it really wasn't an appeal for funds. It was really a, hey, we're all thinking this through together, and this is just an unprecedented time. And, what thoughts do you have? And Angela, is that an accurate representation of
Yeah,
what happened?
it was yes, it was intentional that I reached out to all of our current and recent past funders and said, we're going to be doing something, right? Because this was in March still. We're putting together a response. We don't have it fully formed yet. It's more, we know what's coming because this, again, having worked in disasters, and we also know that most of our nonprofit peers haven't worked through a pandemic, right? And we also know they're not supply chain experts. Most nonprofits are buying at small volume for their needs, whereas we were thinking, how can we use what we do and really have the greatest impact on protecting our community in a public health crisis? But no, I think the staff was scratching their heads when we were having these meetings going, where is this going? What are we, how are we going to bring this together? But my goal was to let our funders know who you all are connected to other nonprofits who are going through a crisis, who are having clients going through a crisis. So if there was information that we needed to know to direct ourselves, to put ourselves in the best position, you all shared advice and guidance, and that's what really helped us to form, a solid response. So yeah, it was, people that know me know I'm pretty transparent. So sometimes it's uncomfortable. Like, I'm not sure I have all the answers yet, but I know together and collectively, between all of us, we can figure this out. And that was, again, thanks to feedback from you and Kelly, and knowing what was going on. You know your area best, and you've introduced us to other fundees that have really helped us to respond in a strong way. So if I wouldn't have done that to all of our foundations, then I wouldn't have had the connections to be able to do what we've done.
Yeah. So Angela, it was wise, it was smart, and it was
It's
reflecting, but it was reflecting, where things were at the moment. And it really did lead to that, because in our heads, as we then talked to other people, we were like, you should really talk to Angela. And I remember that there were lots of connections after that were kind of built and made, and ideas. And then you went on to have some great investment from some other foundations that were ready to do some innovative things and build capacity and build new relationships as a result of that. So that was a really smart approach. Really was.
So this is textbook good partnership, recognition of each other's assets. Angela tells us Mary knows a lot of people, and a lot of people think highly of Mary and will listen to her if she gives information or referral. And Mary knows that Angela does things that are necessary and important and is trustworthy and good. And so out of that came, how many, you've told me, Angela, you started the pandemic with how many partners, and you now have?
So we started the pandemic with 31 local nonprofit partners that we supplied materials to. And those range from direct health clinics to social service and human service organizations. And as of last week, we're up to 310 organizations that we worked with directly. Plus, we partnered with the Education Partnership to provide protective masks and materials to 140 underserved schools, because they are the school experts. So leveraging that partnership helped us in the back to school season. meet the most need. And then we partnered with an organization I had not even known called Trying Together. And for the life of me, I don't remember which foundation introduced us, but it was a foundation. And they said, you know, the daycares are really struggling to reopen. And actually, it was a fellow advisory board member from the Bayer Center, Jen Cairns of Sarah Hines' house, who had reached out and said, we're getting ready to reopen. This was back in May. And we have to buy all this stuff that we didn't plan on. It wasn't in our budget. Is there any way you can help? And so those connections and conversations helped us combine funding, and we made the purchases for all of the cleaning supplies, protective gear, and some other items that benefited 600 licensed childcare centers here in Allegheny County.
So that is a fabulous example of leverage and relationship. And as I said, recognizing that the foundation community has certain assets, not just money, but a whole lot of relationships and influence, and the nonprofit partner when they are capable and determined, as Angela is. And I do want you all to notice that Angela is doing this class in her car because she needs this. She needs this. So I think that this is a really important story about fundraising. You think, well, yeah, but you know, this relationship, this recognition of expertise on both sides and a way to partner together has resulted in a terrific asset for our community. Thank you, Angela. Now, Mary, we haven't heard what surprised you. So let's go back to you for that question.
Sure. So, you know, certainly one of the things is food, as Angela mentioned too, but it was seeing how many organizations built new partnerships around food. So every time we talked to a youth program, they were saying, well, actually what we're doing now is delivering food because we can't gather students together. And we're really concerned about our families and we know them. And every time we talked to other organizations, they were talking about food. It was building all kinds of partnerships too that were incredible. But Peggy, one of the big things for me that I was thrilled about and surprised was the power. We know the power of the nonprofit sector because we're all part of it, but we don't always see it being counted. And when the CARES Act passed and PPP was made available to nonprofits, that was a huge moment. And you and I have been around for a long time, and we've seen lots of times when the nonprofit sector is not counted, certainly not in the realm of, oh, there's the business community and small businesses. The nonprofit sector was being counted, and that was a big moment to have that kind of power and recognition go forward. And I think that I've been watching some polls as well. The reputation of the nonprofit sector in some years suffered a little bit. It's gone up and down some. And this is one of those times when people are seeing it in action and feeling it in their hearts and in their communities. So it's a nice time to see that reputation go back up too, so that that power of the sector is really important. And I think the other aspect of that is really about empathy. Is, you know, we as a sector try to build empathy in other folks because you all are seeing right on the ground what is happening for people and for communities. And, you know, when we saw COVID and people were saying, well, we think that COVID is having a disparate impact on some communities and their inequities showing up again. It really highlighted that for people, and the fact that so many kinds of people were needing food. So it was the neighbor who suddenly lost their job, and it was everyone had a relative. Everyone has relatives who have been laid off or unemployed now. It really is a chance to kind of build some of that empathy and understanding in the community, and we hope that that really kind of keeps extending. And I'm seeing a bit of that around equity in general and racism. So I think those are pieces that are good surprises for us.
Yeah, I think that one of the things that is percolating through this conversation is the concept of trust and the trust in nonprofits. We studied this a number of years ago at the Bear Center, and trust in nonprofits was really directly related to the small ones that people saw their influence and impact. So they might respond, "No, I don't trust nonprofits." But then when you'd say, "Well, but what about your community center?" or the trying together people who are working in your children's school, or oh well, I trust them. And so, I was interested, Mary, that you were talking about the use of the word essential. I would say that nonprofit work has been essential. And Angela's point about in underserved communities, we've been living in a crisis always for the people that we serve, and we have been essential to their health and well-being for a long time. And this crisis has highlighted that fact and made it clear to people that they need. I was so moved by the people at the Bible Church who, like Angela, they had an asset. They had buses that they had acquired some years ago to give rides to kids back and forth to school. And so, because they didn't want their children walking after dark in the neighborhood. And so they bought buses and they made that not happen. Kids could still play football and get home, and that kind of thing. Well, anyway, they had these buses and they had these grab and go sites, and they were told that people could go to the school and pick up food, but they knew that 45% of the people in Homewood don't have a car. So they put the food on their buses that they owned, and they took the food to people's homes. I absolutely love and respect that in my nonprofit colleagues, that just get it done. These are our people and we will take care of them, is so, so beautiful. But one other thing that surprised me, back to the sort of more technical aspects of nonprofit funding, there has been a 300% increase in wills and bequests, giving charitable donations to nonprofits in COVID time. This week in the Chronicle of Philanthropy, there was a story about a recent study there. 60% of the donors are women, and the average gift size is over $60,000 a year. And they said they could see, so the percentage went up 300% and 400% in March and April, and then as the infections began to abate, it went back down. And then when the infections went back up this summer, they saw again this big increase in wills and bequests. Now, this is hard for most nonprofits because wills and bequests are a technical kind of fundraising, and most of us don't have the technical skill to be involved in that particular piece. But I say to you, this is important, and this is something that could assure long-term stability. So we need to help you with this one way or the other. I note to Yvonne, we'll be doing a class on how to work on this, but I have been a fundraiser most of my natural life. And many years ago in New Orleans, I was offered a wonderful gift in a bequest. And I found one of my board members who was a trust attorney. And I went to him and said, I want to know how to receive this gift appropriately and safely for our organization and for the donor. And he patted my hand literally, and he said, "You do your development stuff, I'll take care of the instruments." So there are ways for us, even if we get an opportunity, there are ways for us to take it, even if we don't have that technical capacity. And I just want to give that to you, that if you haven't done anything with planned giving, you might want to consider what that opportunity could look like and how to get it done one way or the other, because that was surprising to me, and yet how understandable. The nonprofit sector was built by baby boomers who are turning 65 at the rate of 10,000 a day, now 70 at the rate of 10,000 a day, and we want to live our values into death. So, that was a surprise to me. Okay, so we've talked a bit about what have you learned and what has surprised you. Let's move on to a question that is sort of what has been counterintuitive, what has not seemed to be, as I said, wills going up in a time where people are dying to our sadness at the rate of 200,000 persons thus far. That's not a surprise in a way, I just hadn't thought of it. But what has been counterintuitive to your expectation? And Mary, maybe we could start with you.
Sure. You know, I think one of the things that's counterintuitive is that we're pretty concerned about mental health of folks. And I know we did early a workshop on self-care because we were all feeling stressed. And we, you know, and we, many of us, including our staff, we have jobs. We have some real security. You know, we're privileged, and we know that there are so many people who are struggling in so many ways. You know, thinking about that is a real challenge. So that isolation is a real issue. But at the same time, this isolation that we have has pushed us to do things virtually. And one of the things that we've seen is that it's pushed a lot of our nonprofits to be very creative and to use the virtual world in a whole new way. So we've seen groups. We did a session and had some wonderful examples like the Veterans Breakfast Club, who serves a range of ages, but started with and still has really big breakfasts for older veterans. And so, you know, a barrier for some of them is, you know, they're not feeling well that day, they can't travel to the events. All of a sudden it opened up a whole new world. They started to do virtual events, and they were having people participate. They've made a lot of calls to a lot of their older vets. A lot of younger vets were just getting on and loving this. And with some of their older vets, they were making phone calls to them to say, do you have a computer or a tablet or something like that, or a phone, or, you know, did your grandson ever teach you how to use that? But what we saw with that and with other groups is that they were saying, you know, we had always planned to put our curriculum online or to try to do some more virtual things because we know parents are busy and we wanted to reach them. All of a sudden it pushed all that, and groups were doing it. We've seen telemedicine have a huge impact, and therapists are saying, wow, our no-show rate used to be up here and now it's down to nothing because people love this, and it's overcome a lot of barriers. So I think it's one of the counterintuitive things that we see. There's challenges, and we all know there's challenges with technology, but it's offered something really, really new. I think the other thing that's counterintuitive and that's personally sad for me is that this is a public health pandemic that affects everyone. So it's one of those opportunities that you think we really need to create unity, and we see a lot of that. We see a lot of, you know, our donors, as you're talking about, a lot of people who want to give, but we also see a lot of division that has been tied to it. And that's one of the things that's sad for me, is to see that something that should bring us together isn't always the case, that it actually, the elements that we've had that are divisive are there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So Angela, what is counterintuitive? What surprised you in a different kind of way?
So, similar to Mary's comment about technology, but from a different perspective, having to meet people or discuss with a funder that is faceless, because at the beginning, not everybody was doing Zoom. We were as a staff, but all my board wasn't, and we were being introduced to new funders who I've never met in my life. And I am a people person. I am a talk-in person. I need to read people's body language to see, you know, I get your point. We're talking to some ghosts out there today. I love to see people's faces, and it's very hard because I can definitely talk a lot, and I can get very excited and try to cover way too many things in a short amount of time. And doing that to an invisible audience, it was so uncomfortable those first few weeks. You know, I've had the opportunity to sit down with, and we've had meetings. So sending her this sort of preliminary idea and having a phone conversation was one thing, but then to be introduced to some of our major foundations that we've never worked with before to explain who Global Links is when we're very unique, and then what we're going to do in COVID. And here's what I think, and I think we need to raise this X amount of money. And there's just like, it's like I'm talking to a wall, right?
Mhm.
That was, it is just not the way, we're normally doing things. So I am happy to say that I've met all but one of the foundation liaisons we've worked with since then. And I gave them feedback. I said, once Zoom came up, it would really help to be able to see each other, because I don't know if I'm talking and like I'm so off base, if I misread your priorities, your funding guidelines. That made me feel very, very vulnerable, right? And I just had to talk myself through it in my head, saying, I know what we do, I'm confident in my team, and I know my nonprofit peers, and I know we can help them, and I'm just going to keep it. I felt like I was on my soapbox, but I'm talking to my living room, and much to my kids' chagrin, they're like, shut up, Mom. We know what you do. And I'm like, yeah, just bear with me here. So I think that was probably the most counterintuitive and counter my nature. And I think many of our nature, we're human creatures, right? So
Angela, for many years, I've always tried to go to school since we offer so many classes. I think it's important to be a student sometimes and have that perspective. So several years ago, I went to the Charitable Giving Institute to learn more about fundraising training. And what your story that you just told was so clear. What they said was, and oh, this is hard for me too, Angela, that a good fundraiser should be listening for 60% of the time. But when you're virtual and you don't know the person and you ask a question and maybe it doesn't go anyplace, your knee-jerk reaction is to talk faster and longer about what you do know and what you do want. And of course, one of my rules when it was an in-person visit was if you didn't learn anything, you lost the opportunity that you had. And the only way you can learn anything is to shut up. And so I literally in calls have sat in people's offices saying inside my head, don't talk, Peggy. Don't talk, Peggy. Let them talk. And so this is another way that this has turned it on its head to say you're trying desperately, but they are as imperiled by the virtual world, or perhaps more so, or maybe they have a sick child who's sitting on their lap while they're trying to listen to you. And thank God for a talkative, smart person who's got a lot to say, because I'm really tired today and we'll just let her carry it. So this is a really important part of all of this, is that once again, many of us know how to do it better, but this time doesn't facilitate that kind of, Mary, I see you nodding. So join us in this conversation about what it's like to try to make a new relationship, in particular in a time where we can't be in the office together and read each other's, are your eyes lighting up? Are you excited about this? Or am I boring you? And I can tell it, I can't necessarily see it. So what do you think?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think what we've seen at our foundation, we do a lot of gathering, and I see people like Carol from Homestead that participate, and we find people love to get together because they've been missing each other in real life. And I know we see that on Bear things, and people are like, hi, I haven't seen you in a while. But to establish new relationships is really hard that way. And we rely on those connections and that networking and that face-to-face time and that ability to kind of work it out. So I think that this is a really tough time to build new.
And none of us were prepared. I mean, we've all talked about, we work at Robert Morris University, and Robert Morris gave the faculty 2 days to go from in-person instruction to online instruction, 2 days. So the funders don't know how to ask questions. Hugging, I miss hugging so much. Oh,
right.
yes. But I think that the funders, didn't get any instruction in how to be a virtual funder, how to facilitate productive conversation. The recipients are in many cases in a very difficult time. And so they're not being necessarily as creative and resourceful as they might have been if it was less stressed. And so we're just in this stew of anxiety and need on all parts to do the right thing, to do good things, but how do we facilitate that for each other? That's a really interesting conversation.
It calls for a lot of kindness, doesn't it? I think, and a lot of patience with each other.
Yeah, flexibility and humility, everybody all around. So counterintuitive, I really, both of our panelists talked about the use of technology and the importance of technology. And what we're hearing for capacity building is a lot of people are asking for better technology, because what has happened very glaringly, when we started the Bear Center now over 20 years ago, we had a staff for technology, and we had regular technology engagements and classes. We still have the classes to this day, but there was a recognition in the nonprofit sector that technology was an issue for under-resourced small nonprofits. And over time, the conversation became different. And it was said to us that, you know, really technology is part of operations, and we're not doing specific grants for technology. We will accept them as part of a programmatic grant if there's a need for additional technology, but we're not necessarily focusing on that. Again, you've met one foundation, you've met one foundation. I'm not saying, Mary, that was universally true, but the conversation did change in the larger community about the importance of really making sure technology was up to speed. And then COVID happened. And I think one of the really counterintuitive things is that some organizations have thrived during COVID and others have not thrived and are really pretty desperate. And in some cases, I think that is a relation to their use of technology, their sophistication with technology. Some executive directors who have been executive directors for a very long time still had secretaries, and they did the technology part of the work. They filed the grant reports, and some people even still got their emails printed out and given to them. I mean, you know, really, we just kind of didn't talk about that because it wasn't socially acceptable, but we all kind of knew it. And now everybody is atomized, sent to their home office or home basement or wherever, and technology and the ability to use technology is critical. Frankly, I'm so grateful to Yvonne, because Yvonne is technologically savvy and I am not so. So, you know, for instance, for us, it's meant that we have to have technology people on every one of our classes. So this technology problem needs to be put into the larger conversation. And I think the digital divide language needs to come back up, and we need to start saying, we've got to do better with this, because I believe that this is going to be a permanent change in the way business is conducted, and we're disadvantaging worthy organizations because of management issues, not program, not service, not other kinds of things.
And Peggy, just to back that up, we recently had a focus group and a stakeholder survey done in our area. And the consultant who did it came back to us and said, whoa, I'm surprised, because the big issue that came up was technology, and it was the lack of broadband and wireless. And we know that for so many it's been an organizational issue, but we know for so many community members, it's been a real challenge to access and to handle classroom and access to services. So it's I'm glad you raise it in that way. It's huge. Yeah. It's a huge issue going forward.
And I would like for us to have a community-wide conversation about this and a multifaceted response.
Yes.
Because I really do
Absolutely.
think it's critically important. And I also just wanted to take one other piece here about counterintuitive. Angela mentioned her board, and in fundraising, we continue to hope that boards are going to help us with the fundraising. This is the hope of your heart, those of you who are leaders in nonprofits. And so one of the things that we are advocating for is to really engage with your board on a regular basis at the beginning of the COVID time, some of our clients said, we're going to take a pause now and we're not going to have a meeting, or we're not going to have our meeting until our regular quarterly meeting, which is in May, or things like that. That was a mistake. And to whatever degree I could help them see that, we did. Boards need to be in the game. They need to be in the conversation. Setting long-term strategy may be very difficult to do, but short-term strategy is essential. And their knowledge of your business and the needs of the business continues to be essential in getting them engaged in helping you find resources, whether those again are cash resources or in-kind resources or relationship resources or whatever. So if you are not regularly engaging with your board, you are missing a fundraising opportunity as well as governance opportunity. So it may be counterintuitive when you're not able to meet together, et cetera. And sometimes it's frustrating, without a doubt. I've been on board meetings that I got off the phone and burst into tears because we just didn't get there. You know, we didn't connect in the way that we needed to. So I got it. But I'm saying, so this is resilience and determination, which have been characteristics of successful fundraisers forever. Pick the phone back up, call again, make another connection, reach out, and continue to try to work with your resources, which includes your board. So our next question, and we're doing great, guys, on our time here. Thank you so much for this so far. Are there any, I've been watching the chat, are there any questions from the audience that you would like to pose at this time for the panelists? If you would like to, Yvonne, can you let people unmute themselves? Anybody want to ask a question or make a comment?
I believe you can unmute yourself.
Okay.
If you can't, let me know. Can somebody wave at me or chat?
I'm waving. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I really don't have a question, but I will say the last comment, Peggy, that you mentioned about staying engaged with your board. It's paramount. I'm a new ED that started on March 1st, about a week before the shutdown.
God bless you.
Yes, thank you. And I have been blessed because I have a board that has stayed engaged, and then I've conducted and in the process of doing like one-on-one half-hour interviews with my board, because I think when I started, I had been with the organization for a duration prior to taking over and assuming the ED role. But there were a lot of assumptions about what I knew about those board members and the talents that I felt that they may have and what they can contribute. And conversely, I think there was a lot of assumptive nature of what types of skills or backgrounds that I have and what I can bring. And through these little half-hour mini interviews, I've told them that I would have rather had cups of coffee or a lunch on me, you know, let's get together and really get to know each other. But I can tell you that even through this, the virtual platforms, they've been very, very constructive, and it's reinvigorating me. It's giving me a new sense of purpose, a new sense of urgency and energy to say, wow, you know, this board is complex. It's highly adaptable. They've experienced a lot of different things, and they got our mission. They got our mission supported like every day, and just like I do. So, that's just you know, it was difficult. It was awkward. There were some people I knew really well. There were some people I really don't know, other than being a board member. But boy, are these really taking down barriers and rejuvenating communication. So,
wonderful.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you. No, that's really an important thing. And Angela, I know that you have told us about how much change has occurred at Global Links through COVID. Could you talk a little bit about how you have worked with your board as you've moved through a period of dynamic change? Thanks, Neil.
Yes, and I actually, I think I mentioned earlier, I'm a new ED. It's still new in my opinion because it's only 2.5 years, and this year being the COVID year, my first year being the transition year, last year was, I guess, the normalization year, right? So when I get to March 1, I think that's when I'll have the party. That's my 3-year anniversary. But I'm listening to what you say, and I'm really happy with what we've done this year, but I want to take a step back, because when we were a little bit smaller, a little less mature, and I feel like that was only 5-8 years ago, I would come to these classes and hear these best practices about engaging the board, and we were, it's known as, we were a founder-led board, good people, but they had sort of, the energy level had sort of dipped, right? And I knew most of them, but I was not the ED, so I didn't go to all the meetings. And I remember sitting in these classes, like, we're a small organization, and how in the world, if I do become ED, am I going to have time to do all this engagement, right? And it sounded so, even my first year, it sounded so time consuming, so difficult. Like, what do we do? And what Neil just said, sometimes I lead by gut, and I need to know people, right? If you walk in their shoes, right? And I did a coffee in person with each of my board members. But what we did in COVID, because now we've worked together for 2.5 years, or 2 years at that point, it was just informing the board, right? I wasn't necessarily sure, just like I wasn't sure what we were asking the funders. It was informing them. And a mentor had told me that back when I transitioned 3 years ago, said, the best thing I've ever done is starting like a Monday bulletin of, here's the news from our organization last week, and just some bullet points. And I thought, yeah, that's great and all, but you've been a director for years. I'm never going to have that much time. That, though, it sort of like was ringing in my head. And from the very beginning, I just started asking each of our program managers, send me the update from the domestic aid. Who are our new partners? And it gave them something to summarize their week, which helped them stay focused, right? And then it helped raise the questions of, we're not sure what to do with this. So I would cut and paste that and then add, here we were in the media. Here's a grant we got. That then gave the board something to react to, or to contribute to, or to say, oh, we're now working with them. Well, I know them, and it helped them to see how to get engaged. Not that we had more meetings. We kept our meeting schedule normal, which is 4 quarterly, and our committees, but there was more dialogue back and forth. And so to me, engagement again came back to communication, and it didn't have to be these long, proposals. They're a short email, and I don't even do them every week now. It's maybe every other week, but that was what it took. And it really, we all just had a lot more dialogue. And if they had a question on something that was for our surplus, one of our program managers said, well, just talk to Luke directly. He needs some more information on that. He'd love to work with you, right? So I think I just have to, credit communication. It sounds so basic, but it's so key.
I like.
No, sorry, Neil, go ahead.
I picked up a little nugget, and thank you for sharing how you tied in. No, I really did. I really liked how you just tied in the fact that it was also a way to engage your team. So getting those quick bullet points, and that also then shuttles information through yourself, as
right.
Thank you. Sorry.
So,
and I will just.
Oh, please, Mary.
Oh, that's okay. I was just going to add in, that's such a great approach. And I've been doing kind of updates for my board every month or so, but during COVID, went to weekly updates. And one of the other things that I've learned over time in writing those for the board is also to add in anything that I can that's kind of personal, because it helps them connect with staff and with us. So we'll add in congratulations or stories about anything that's happening with board members as well. So it's a great tool to kind of build that network. You can do that with donors as well.
So there's a study that used to be done, I don't know whether it will be again, but it's called Daring to Lead. And it was done out of California, Compass Point. 3,000 nonprofit executive directors responded to this study. And they showed that 55% of executive directors responded that problems with their board were their most problematic things. 55%. And then they asked, how much time do you spend with your board in a week? And the vast majority of people said less than 1 hour a week. And so you think these conversations that we're having right here are directly related to how willing board members are going to be to fundraise for the organization. If they feel included and knowledgeable, they will help you. If they only come once every 3 months and hear a lovely update and used to be get to have a nice lunch, they are not real motivated in most cases to feel that it's their job to get it done. But if you are involving them on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, then you are far more likely to have them have a sense of responsibility and ownership that leads them to be willing to help in the fundraising equation. If I had to say what the most people come to me personally as a consultant and ask for, it's could you get my board to fundraise? Well, there's a long story that goes around that question, and you all have been answering that story. So I think this has been a useful conversation in terms of fundraising, because board connection and board relationship cannot be underestimated. Now, we've been having a lively conversation in the chat room about technology, and it is in the chat room. We're getting some resources. I see Christine Kirby, did you want to speak to this just briefly to the group to highlight what people are, what you all have been talking about, you and Carol?
So we have a rather large board, and we also, our mission is to serve meet the civil legal aid needs for low-income people and victims of domestic violence. So we work on eviction prevention and foreclosure prevention, utility shutoffs, family matters. And we have a portion of our board, a third of our board is made up of client-eligible, low-income folks. And their participation in the board fell off at COVID a little bit. We've been doing conference calls rather than Zoom meetings. But the thought was to get them tablets, and we began to research what resources are there for connectivity in the community. And Allegheny County, there's few, but not what I expected. And Beaver, but the outlying kind of donut don't have any. So we're trying to figure out how they can participate in these. Because they're resource navigators in the community too. They're the ones who tell people about the rental assistance programs. They tell people about the mortgage foreclosure. So we're trying to figure out how we can keep them connected. All of our trainings are going virtual. How can we do our legal literacy sessions for, and have our client leaders connected? So I've had money for tablets. We had some concern about do we do Wi-Fi enabled tablets and getting into that long-term arrangement from a budgetary standpoint. So if Global Links is going to move from personal protective equipment to internet connectivity, I think she could probably grow to over 500 community partners really quickly. But I'm just trying to figure out what is out there. What can we do? Picking up on Angela's thing, what can we do to keep these?
Thank you, Christine. And you bring up this other wrinkle, some of the board doesn't have the same kind of access to technology. And then of course your community involvement. I think someone else wanted to speak.
I did.
Yes, please.
I'm sorry, my computer is so dark. But anyway, my name is Carol, and I'm with the Hill District Consensus Group. And I just want to reiterate what Christine said now, and also what Mary said. Now, we've been doing the navigation work alongside what Christine's doing, and they're under the navigators are actually under the Hill District Consensus Group. Now, here's the breakdown. And I like what you said, Mary, about how do we create unity? Because, for me being a 503 nonprofit, grassroots, mutual aid person, all the time before COVID, sometimes I feel like I'm Gumby, because I'm being pulled between the navigators that are because they're not used to working this way. They're used to being out there on the ground. Then I'm here, the foundation world. Then I hear, and so I said, there has to be some kind of unity. And I like what you really said, Mary, about we need to create unity. We say we are creating unity, but it just goes back to everybody doing the same thing, going around the same mountain, not going up the mountain together. So I brought that up because I've been struggling a little bit with this, and even as a small nonprofit, we were selected to get possibly some funding from another foundation. But I went to the online meeting. They told us why we were selected, and I appreciate being selected. I guess there's some COVID money left out there, but a lot of us want to continue the work that we're doing, but they want us to go way back to the beginning of COVID. But no one has a problem with that, but they're dictating what we could, how we need to carry on the work. And I said, well, if we go back and we carry on the work, you're saying this can't be included. You won't recognize that. You won't. And I said, here we go. And then on top of that, they need the proposal by Monday. So how do we just? It's like the song Lamb Chop. It just goes on and on and on and on, instead of like improve this train wreck that keeps going on and on and on. When do this relationship start to improve and we built this great unity and equity as well?
Thank
So
you.
thank you, Mary and Christina.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Carol. Mary, do you want to respond? You're muted, Mary. You're muted.
Sorry, I'll take a crack and hope everyone else jumps in. I think that sometimes funders can be terribly unfair, and to ask you to turn around something quickly. I don't know, Carol, if this is government money. I know that sometimes there has been.
It's care fund, yeah. I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah, there's been, I know that sometimes what happens is there's money that comes down, and then there are timelines and deadlines that other people have. And I've seen that happen with some of the COVID dollars where they only have December to spend it, so they're trying to push it out. But that's a
Just
huge
like the
challenge.
eviction process.
Yeah, right.
December.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think we need to really listen and hear from, nonprofits on the ground like you about what the continued impacts are and what kind of technical assistance you all can use, because, investing in the organizations themselves is pretty key. I mean, for you to be able to have to work between, like you said, your navigators and your funders is a huge piece to be taking on.
Yeah, there's this brings up the Council on Foundations has put out a pledge that that is interesting, and I went and looked at the pledge. It says loosen or eliminate restrictions on current grants, make new grants as unrestricted as possible so nonprofit partners have maximum flexibility, reduce what we ask of our nonprofit partners, postponing reporting requirements, site visits, and other demands, contribute to the community-based emergency response funds and other efforts to address the health and economic impact, communicate proactively and regularly about our decision-making and response to provide helpful information while not asking more of our grantees. And this was particularly interesting to me. Commit to listening to our partners and especially to those communities least heard, lifting up their voices and experiences to inform public discourse and our own decision-making so we can act on their feedback. We recognize that the best solutions to the manifold crises caused by COVID-19 are not found within foundations. So this is a pledge that the Council on Foundations has put, I think, in response, Carol, to a lot of the frustration. Now, when I looked at that, they have, I think, close to 800 foundations nationally who have signed this pledge. I looked at the list. I didn't study it in detail, but I noticed that the Pittsburgh Foundation and the Heinz Endowments have signed this particular pledge. And you can hear in Mary's responses to you that she is thinking like this and has acted like this. And I think many other foundations have been influenced by this kind of thinking. It's not perfect. And I, like you, have had foundations say, yes, we would like to give you some money. You got to get us something tomorrow. And it's like, whoa, no dinner for my family tonight because I'll be writing. So
Yep.
it is true. We are still, we're imperfect and we're partial, but thank you for sharing this with us. And I'm sure Mary will carry it back to others in her foundation community, and we will try to be an agent for continuing to be kind and
Yeah.
collaborative, which is what I hear you're asking for.
Yeah, I really appreciate it because now, you know, since I am well connected with everyone in the smaller nonprofit world, now everyone's just like you said, we're not going that. We don't have time to do that because we're doing all this hands-on mutual aid work. And so it's really like, you know, I guess a lot of people will pass up the funding, even me, because I said, I can't turn this around like that.
Yeah. So Carol, you are essential. and thank you.
Well, I said my work always matters. And so, you know, even with the foundation, Rural Pittsburgh Foundation, we know each other all real well. And they have been listening. But I said, you guys have to quit putting us in y'all box and let us do the work. Yeah. And not Nikki pick and just, you know, say, hey, submit a proposal in the next year or something. This work that we are doing, give us money and time to do like a 5-year.
Right. There you go. Sustainability and operating funds, the desire of our hearts. But thank you, Carol. I'm going to go back and ask
Thank you.
One more question of my panelists. I guess I would like to hear about what sort of what's next, do you think? And are we forever changed? So, Angela, what do you think? Are we forever changed? And what's next in working forward?
I will say yes, we're forever changed. And for those that slide back into, as this woman who, I'm sorry, I didn't catch her name, was just saying, you know, just go back to the way it was. I think
your audio is strange, Angela. Did you do something different? Thank you.
I opened the windows because I was getting very hot, so I'll close them again. Sorry.
No worries.
Yes, we're forever changed because many people's eyes have been opened to what many of us in the nonprofit sector have seen or known. And to go back and just do things the way we're doing is to throw away an opportunity to, whatever we were doing, get more input from diverse perspectives. You know, whether that's informally or formally, depending on the size of our organizations, those that support us to, you know, bring contacts that have other perspectives. We have an opportunity now to not just bring sustainability and environmentally, you know, we need to protect our planet, we need to protect our people, but we're meeting basic human needs. Like the nonprofit sector has always been meeting basic human needs, whether those are for food or housing or health or mental health. You know, all the animal charities out there that keep some of our, you know, most challenged community members company, that is protecting mental health. And it's a way to frame the message, but it's also a way for us to think about everything we do, from where we buy our supplies, whether they're our office supplies or our pizzas for our staff meetings. We can put all of our power as a sector into supporting all the things that the past 6 months have brought up, right? How can we nourish our own staff and support network and advocate and share these messages, and also then put our dollars into supporting Black, Brown, immigrant, LGBTQ businesses, because it's the power of the dollar. And the nonprofit sector, even though we're always cash strapped, we still consume things. And I think it's an opportunity I mean, I think the whole world should be doing this, but of course there's some that are doing the, they take the pledge, but it's about putting our dollars where our values are and putting that message out to continue the message past the disaster, because this is so similar to a normal natural disaster. There's a huge infusion of resources and attention and momentum at the beginning, and a year later, no one wants to hear about the Haiti victims. No one wants to hear about, the
Yeah.
Sandy victims. And there's no dollars so it is continually, this brought to the fore the tremendous disparities in our country, in our healthcare systems, but so much. I mean, public health is domestic violence. Public health is vaccination. Public health is mental health. I think we would be, it would be disadvantageous to ignore what our eyes have been open to.
So to Angela's point, nonprofit revenues and expenses represent about 6% of the GDP. We may be nonprofit, but we do spend money, and using our money to advance social justice, which is what you're saying. The choice we make
Absolutely.
of who we buy our pizza from is a political choice, and we can do all kinds of things to see that more justice is in the world through the choices we make with our own businesses, the way people are hired, compensated, the way a board is composed.
Absolutely.
All of these are
All of them.
absolutely political choices, and we need to be on it. So thank you, Angela. Mary,
Yeah.
what about you? What's next? Are we forever changed?
Yes, I absolutely agree with Angela. We are forever changed. The opportunities are tremendous for us to move forward in this. We've seen, for example, our board be motivated and work in a whole different way. We've published a statement that says racism is a public health issue, which it is. And I appreciate Angela listing all of those things as public health issues. They really are. I think that that as people work with their donors, as Angela's noted, getting people to think long-term is the big piece, is how do we take that sense of urgency and hope and focus on justice kind of for the long term. The other concern, and I know this is shared in the foundation community, and I think that the foundation community will get pushed to continue to be more flexible and also give more dollars. But there's also a real concern about the sustainability of a lot of the nonprofit sector. There really is. And, we went to our board, they did an emergency fund. We went back to them again a few months later now and said, we need another COVID impact fund because now PPP is gone. Now these other emergency funds are gone, and people have housing issues, people have food issues. We know that our nonprofits are still on the front line. We're very worried about where folks are. And as you said, Peggy, we know that some nonprofits have done well in this setting and others have not. So there are some areas that are not as essential or as sexy. It's much harder to raise funds right now in those areas. And so thinking about things like doing a lot more scenario planning, thinking about consolidation, I think that's a really smart thing to think about now. And I think that you'll find that funders will support that kind of work now and help you think ahead, because all nonprofits may not make it through this pandemic.
Yeah, I want to underscore a couple of things that both of our panelists said. To Mary's last point, we are working hard on a curriculum around partnership, because I went to Baton Rouge after Katrina. New Orleans had been closed by martial law, and most of I lived and worked in New Orleans for 10 years, and many of my clients and friends were in Baton Rouge right after Katrina. So I was up close and personal on how nonprofits were surviving that catastrophe. And I very clearly saw that those who worked together, who saw value and worth in other people's work and found ways to leverage their work through working closely with others, were the ones who proved to be durable They're the ones who made it through because they had built relationships and expanded their sense of what was possible through partnerships and that sort of thing. So I feel Mary's point about the way we approach our work and the structures in which we work needs to be thought carefully about as we move forward. But I also want to talk for a moment about being more inclusive in the way you think about your donors. So this is a fundraising during the pandemic, and we in Pittsburgh, we are blessed to be the third or fourth wealthiest community in the country in terms of foundation assets. So we often define our conversation too closely, in my opinion, to what the foundations think and can do. They do and think wonderful things, and we are grateful to them for their support. But individual donors still make up about 80% of the billions of dollars that are given to charity. And one of the conversations I think that we should be having is, how are we reaching out to donors of color? How are we being thoughtful about, again, this comes back to some degree to the board composition and the connections that they have, but also it's an intentional. We're writing strategic plans now that do not have a separate goal around diversity, equity, and inclusion. They have diversity, equity, and inclusion in every goal. And in the goal under financial sustainability, we are lifting up donors of color, giving circles, Poise Foundation. I mean, we have people in our community have been leaders in encouraging philanthropy from a wide spectrum of kinds of people who give. There's also something called the Generosity Index. And the Generosity Index shows that Utah is the most generous state in the nation if you look at the percentage of dollars given from a person's income. Utah. Well, that's the Mormons, ladies and gentlemen, because Mormons tithe and they give their money to charity. But the third most generous state in the nation is Mississippi. Pennsylvania is 25th or 26th. So we really need to think in terms of the fact that people who make less than $75,000 a year on average give a bigger percentage of their income to charity than people who make more than that. So being inclusive in the way we think about who can help us, who wants to see us thrive and prosper, and having an individual donor opportunity on your website or a GoFundMe or a whatever that allows me to give you $10, may not be able to give you 10,000, but I might be able to give you 10 or 20. And if you can get hundreds of me giving you 10 or 20, you've got it. So as we think about fundraising during the pandemic, believe me, ladies and gentlemen, I know how stressed and hard this is. I know you don't have time for individual giving. You're praying that that foundation will give you enough money to take you forward several months, not a week. But I would be remiss in my responsibilities if I did not kind of close this conversation by saying, remember, the vast majority of money that comes into nonprofits comes from individuals who value your work. And you all are valuable. You are doing work that is essential. And you need to tell your story and make it possible for me to give you some money, because I just want to see you thrive and continue to support our community. I write a letter every time we put out a catalog, and the letter I wrote this time was hard to write because there's so much challenge and so much overwhelming things in our community. And I found myself singing. I don't know if that's true for any of the rest of you, but when I'm really troubled, I often have a song come into my mind, sometimes a hymn. This time it was a Leonard Cohen song. And he talks about the crack where the light gets in. My biggest hope is that we will not go back to normal. Normal was not good. Normal was inequitable. It was unjust. It was championing the rights of the rich over the rights of the poor. It was not good. My biggest hope for what's next is we go forward and that we see this terribly difficult time that has been painful and frightening and scary for all of us as a crack where the light gets in. We thank you all so much for your time and attention this morning. We've gone over 2 minutes. Mary, Angela, mwah, mwah, hugs to all. Thank you all so much, and I hope this has been helpful to you. We look forward to seeing you again in the community. God bless each one of you. Bye.